You look at Mel Brooks, and you see the history of comedy. You see a man who is 98 years old, a man who has outlived his wife, his best friends, and almost his entire generation. He is supposed to be the man who makes the world laugh. The man who spent every single evening with Carl Reiner eating dinner on trays and watching Jeopardy until the very end. But when the cameras found him yesterday outside that quiet, secluded home where he has spent the last few years in semi-retirement, there was no laughter. There was no joke to break the tension. There was only a man who looked like the entire century had finally collapsed on top of his shoulders. For days, the world has been spinning with the headlines about Rob Reiner. The brutal nature of the crime, the arrest of his son Nick, the absolute shock of a Hollywood dynasty crumbling in a single night of violence. But while the news anchors discuss court dates and police reports, Mel Brooks remained silent. And that silence was louder than anything else because everyone in this town knows that Mel wasn't just Rob's father's best friend. He was Rob's second father. He was Uncle Mel. He was the man who changed Rob's diapers. The man who guided him when he transitioned from meathead to one of the most respected directors in the world. So when Mel finally invited a single trusted journalist into his living room, no cameras, just a tape recorder, and began to speak, it wasn't a press release. It was a confession. And what he said changes everything we thought we knew about what happened inside that house in Brentwood. Mel didn't start by talking about the murder. He started by talking about guilt. He sat in his armchair, his hands shaking slightly, not from age, but from a rage he has been suppressing for years. He said that people are calling this a tragedy, a sudden snap of mental illness, a horrific accident. Mel looked up, his eyes sharp and wet, and said, "This wasn't an accident. And it wasn't sudden. We watched this slow-motion car crash for 10 years, and we let it happen because we loved Rob too much to tell him he was wrong." This is the part that hurts to hear. Mel Brooks, a man known for his kindness, admitted that the inner circle, the people who truly loved Rob and Michelle, knew that Nick Reiner was a ticking time bomb. But the picture Mel paints is not one of a monster born overnight. It is a picture of parents whose love became the very weapon that destroyed them. Mel recounted a specific afternoon about 6 months ago. It was a Sunday. Rob had come over to Mel's house, just like his father Carl used to do. But Rob wasn't eating. He was pacing. Mel described Rob as a man who was being hunted in his own home. He told Mel that Nick had returned to the Brentwood estate after another failed stint in rehab. But this time it was different. The boy, though he was a man in his 30s, they still called him the boy, wasn't just using again. He was delusional. He was aggressive. Rob told Mel that he had started locking his bedroom door at night. Think about that. Rob Reiner, a man who built his entire life, his entire public persona on the ideals of communication, family, and openness, was locking himself away from his own son. When Mel asked him why he didn't call the police, then why he didn't get a restraining order, Rob gave an answer that now haunts the air in Mel's living room. He said, "I promised Michelle I wouldn't give up on him. If I kick him out, he dies on the street. If I keep him here, maybe I can save him." Mel slammed his hand on the armrest when he retold this. He said he shouted at Rob. He told him that he wasn't saving his son. He was harboring a danger. But Rob was stubborn. He had that Reiner stubbornness that made him a great director. The kind of stubbornness that makes you push for the perfect shot take after take. But applied to a volatile addict, that stubbornness was fatal. The shocking part of Mel's revelation is not just the violence. It's the financial abuse that preceded it. We all see the net worth, the movies, the Castle Rock empire. We assume money solves problems. Mel revealed that in the last 2 years, the situation had drained Rob and Michelle emotionally and was starting to bleed them financially, not because they were broke, but because the extortion was relentless. Nick wasn't just asking for money. He was demanding it as retribution for perceived slights from his childhood. Mel spoke about reparations that Nick demanded, twisting the family's liberal, open-minded values against them, claiming that his trauma required millions of dollars in compensation. It's a manipulation tactic that is terrifyingly lucid. Mel said that Rob would come to him, tears in his eyes, showing him text messages that were vile, filled with hatred, blaming Rob for everything from Nick's addiction to his career failures. And yet the next day, Rob would buy him a car. Rob would pay for an apartment. Rob would fund a project. Mel called it the Hollywood disease, the belief that if you just throw enough resources at a problem, you can produce a happy ending. Rob thought he could direct his son's recovery like he directed The Princess Bride. He thought if he just set the scene right, provided the right lighting, the right support, the script would change. But life isn't a script. And Mel Brooks, the man who understands the structure of tragedy better than anyone because he understands the structure of comedy, saw the third act coming. He told the interviewer about a moment during the holidays last year. It was a gathering, small, intimate. Nick was there. The atmosphere was tight, like a wire about to snap. Mel watched Nick watching his father. He said it wasn't the look of a son. It was the look of a predator assessing prey. There was a moment when Rob made a joke, a classic self-deprecating Rob Reiner joke, and everyone laughed except Nick. Nick just stared. Later that night, Mel pulled Rob aside. This is the conversation that has kept Mel awake every night since the news broke. Mel grabbed Rob by the shoulders. He emphasized this physically as he told the story, mimicking the grip, and said, "Robbie, you need to get him out. He doesn't look at you with love. He looks at you with ownership." And Rob, sweet, brilliant Rob, pulled away. He was offended. He told Mel, "You sound like the critics. You don't know him like I do. He's in pain." Mel broke down at this point in the interview. He wept for the boy he watched grow up. The boy who used to sit on the floor playing with Carl Reiner. The boy who became a man who couldn't distinguish between love and enabling. Mel feels he failed. He feels that because he is the patriarch now, the last one standing of that great generation of Jewish comedians, it was his job to protect the legacy. And he failed because he didn't call the police himself. But the most shocking detail Mel provided wasn't about the past. It was about the night of the murder. The timeline the police have released is clinical. Time of death, entry wounds, location of the bodies. But Mel knows what happened in the hours before because Rob called him. It was late. Mel was already in bed. The phone rang and Mel hesitated. He almost didn't answer. When he did, Rob's voice was a whisper. He wasn't calling to chat. He was calling to say goodbye, though he didn't say the words. Rob told Mel he's spiraling again. He's screaming about the will. He thinks we're cutting him out. Mel told him to leave the house. "Get in the car, Robbie. Just drive."